All right, folks. Welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Also, just a disclaimer in case you missed the last few episodes. This was recorded prior to the strike. Anyway, in this episode, I chat with writer and director Tommy Lee Wallace about the birth of the Halloween franchise, crafting the Shape Mask, Fright Night 2, Life After Death, his investigations into the legend of the Bell Witch, and more. As always, thank you for listening, and if you'd like to help the show grow, please leave us a review wherever you're listening to the podcast. Anyway, without further ado, here you go.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horathon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
Greetings, boils and ghouls. This is your comrade, the Crypt Keeper here, reporting dead from the sanctuary of the strange. Tonight's macabre myth is a fright-filled feature, one overflowing with monsters, madness, and magic.
Take us back in time. You're a youngster. Are you a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker, or all of the above?
All the above, especially comic books. I guess my first real favorite book, a huge volume of both Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn that my grandma gave me, and my father used to read to me before bedtime out of that book. So I think Mark Twain taught me how to read. Then comic books. And not so much superhero books, but stuff like Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck comics. Those adventures that Donald and Uncle Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie went on really formulated a lot of my childhood. It really stimulated my imagination. So that was the beginnings. Fort building, you bet, everywhere.
Whereabouts in Kentucky did you grow up?
Bowling Green, home of Western Kentucky University. That college campus was kind of my playground, and also John Carpenter's as well. He grew up in a cabin that his father was on the faculty. He grew up literally on the campus. I grew up a short walk away, and we became aware of each other as children. We were in the same school, which was a teacher's training school on campus. He was a year older, so we didn't really get close until we became teenagers, but we were aware of each other throughout our childhoods.
I had no idea that John Carpenter was from Kentucky till you just mentioned that.
Yep, he grew up same town, small town. I lived on my bicycle and got all over the town, and it was a good place to grow up.
So, Tommy, what about your parents? Were either of them artistically inclined, or were they involved in the business at all?
No, not really. They were musically inclined, members of their choir, and got me involved in music early, piano lessons and so forth. But no, they weren't part of the entertainment business at all.
Gotcha. So you played piano. Did you ever join any bands or anything like that?
Actually, from our school was so small, you were invited to join the orchestra as a fourth grade, which I did on trombone, like every other kid my age, in the age of Joan Baez and the Beatles. I picked up a guitar at some point and started learning how to play. And then John and I formed a band when we were teenagers called the Kaleidoscope Rock and Roll Band, and we gigged around our part of Kentucky, playing, mostly for high school dances or fraternity and sorority parties. Yeah, it was good fun.
Did you guys just do cover songs, or did you have your original music?
Well, funnily enough, we did strictly cover songs. In that part of the country, if you were in a band, you needed to know all the rhythm and blues and soul music and Motown music. And to that, we added all the experimental West Coast sounds that were coming up, certainly a lot of British invasion stuff. But on the side, John was writing songs of his own. We didn't perform those in the rock and roll band, but we had sort of a Peter, Paul, and Mary type group with the two of us plus his girlfriend. There, we sang some songs that John composed. They were pretty good. He was a pretty good pop tune writer.
Wow. I wonder if there's any recordings out there that has stuff floating around.
We did a little bit of that, but we made one really wonderful tape, and then John went off to California and took it with him and lost it. Been hard to forgive him for that. But, anyway, what can you do?
Right. So, Tommy, when you think back to formative films and TV shows that you grew up on, what comes to mind?
Well, my favorite movies growing up, like so many others, were some horror movies and sci-fi, Son of Dracula, The Giant Gila Monster, Battle in Outer Space, 12 to the Moon, and certainly the Dracula, The Mummy. Those kind of movies I was really fond of. And TV shows, man, the steady diet of all the American TV series. I guess my favorite was Dick Van Dyke's Show and Beverly Hillbillies and Wild Wild West and various others. The original Mission Impossible was a favorite.
I was raised by my grandfather, so I grew up on a lot of those as well.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah,
too.
Of course. I was going to ask you if you were Twilight.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you have to be.
Absolutely, yeah. That was thrilling stuff, and still is.
Twilight Zone's a staple around here. So, what scared you as a kid?
I lived in the attic of our little house, and it was a big attic room, just right for a boy. But there was a closet at the end of that, like a walk-in closet. That kind of scared me. I would go in there and turn on that light, leave the light on in that closet, because that was sort of, that was dubious. Maybe something bad was in there. I don't know. I have not experienced horrible fears of that ilk in real life. For example, if I'm stuck out in the woods somewhere, I'm not scared of any of that, because I was a Boy Scout. I knew what to do and how to find my way back to wherever I came from. I can't say I've been motivated hugely by fear. It's an abstract thing, and I enjoy playing around with it, but I can't say it's really deeply felt. I feel very lucky to lead a kind of worry-free existence for the most part. It's just in my nature not to be a worrier. I grew up around a couple of world-class worriers in my dad and my grandmother, and I saw what that did to them. I just had my mother's nature just by birth. It was just a lot more happy-go-lucky.
I like to ask everyone this because it's usually a formative experience. Do you recall the very first movie you saw in theaters?
Boy, I think my parents dragged me to something that I didn't even understand. I was too little, but I guess they couldn't afford a babysitter or something. I couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old, and it was some grown-up drama. The last time I saw Paris is what it was called. I think it starred Van Johnson. Black and white, of course. Made no impression on me whatsoever. I think the first movie I really vividly recall being a fan of, I think it was Son of Dracula. It was in black and white until the moment that the vampire killer put a stake in this woman's chest and pounded down on the stake with a big mallet, and it went to color as the blood gushed out. That's like the same technique as Wizard of Oz, black and white until the big moment, and then it's color. Wow. In this case, it was in service of a gusher of blood. So it stays with me, yeah.
I kind of wish that movie theaters would bring that sort of experience back. I've heard several guests that saw The Tickler when it came out and said that there was, air blowing up their leg or someone walking around the theater. The Tingler, yeah, I'm sorry, The Tingler.
Yeah. It was rumored that they electrified the seats, which, listen, given the kind of amusement parks that I grew up around where every ride could be deadly, it could chop your head off or you could go off the rails. OSHA wasn't around yet, and safety measures weren't in full force. So it could be that they electrified the seats because I remember the Tingler. It was this thing that got in your backbone and went up your spine or something like that. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they electrified the seats.
I think that adds to the experience. I can remember, I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. I can remember going to see Scream and someone that worked at the theater dressing up as Ghostface and just walking around the aisles. But I don't think
Sure.
Yeah.
Alan Arkin died just a few days ago, and some people don't recall, but he was one of the great movie villains in a picture called Wait Until Dark, which starred Audrey Hepburn as a blind woman. And a really terrifying scene in that is when they're trapped. She's trapped in an apartment with this guy, and she can't see him, but she knows he's there. And he's kind of toying with her, and she turns the tables because she turns out the light so that he's just as blind as she is. And in that moment when she did that, they turned out every light in the theater. Usually there's kind of little safety lights and exit signs and things. They turned it all out, so the theater itself went super dark. I'm with you. The more of that sort of thing, the better.
Right. Why not just add to the atmosphere? So what was the ultimate catalyst for you going from Kentucky to L.A.?
Well, John had always known since he was about 9 years old. He was, in his mind, he was very sophisticated about how movies were made. I didn't even know what a film director was or that there was such a job. Like so many others, I just didn't think about, people think that people like bring the camera and set it up and make up the actors, make up the lines, and sort of naive version of how movies get made. Well, John knew from an early age what a film director was, and he set his sights on doing that. So by the time he got to college, he was already kicking at the fences. We both were going to Western Kentucky University. He was a year ahead of me, playing in the rock and roll band, and both of us getting restless. He wanted to get on to film school, and it was not going to happen at Western Kentucky University in our town. I knew about this big blue book up at the college library, and so I took him up there, and we went through the book together, and he focused in on 3 colleges that were specializing, that had a cinema department. I believe it was New York University, Miami, and University of Southern California. So he focused in, and finally, I guess it was for me it would have been after 1 year of college I left. So after 2 years of college for John, he enrolled and went off to Southern California. And when I left that town, I was also very interested in the arts. So I discovered, I didn't know it, but I was mad about graphic design. That was another thing I didn't know was a thing until I discovered that they taught that in school. Design work about various kinds, interior design, graphic design, industrial design. And I thought, oh, hey, that's right up my alley. I think I'll do that. So I went off to Ohio University and studied graphic design. And John and I corresponded. Back then it was all snail mail. But man, the letters he was writing was like, oh, I went to Sunset Boulevard last night and was walking along and stuck my head in one of the clubs, and there Buffalo Springfield was playing, or the Doors were playing. It was like, oh, wow. I was getting excited about what was going on out there. But the tug for me, to finally answer your question, the tug for me was between New York, where all the hotshot designers were, like Milton Glaser and Seymour Quast, Pushpin Studios, Peter Max. It was exploding with great poster art and album cover art, big 12 by 12 record albums. I was either going to do that, or I was starting to think about going to the West Coast myself, where John was, because man, he was painting a picture. place and just talking about how cool it was. So spring break, just before I graduated, I took my portfolio, which was pretty good. A lot of graphic design stuff, a lot of exciting visuals. And I took it with me, and a girlfriend and a friend and her car. We zoomed out to Los Angeles on spring break to visit John and to go down to USC. And I showed the animation department my portfolio, and the teacher liked it a lot and accepted me. And so I got accepted into their graduate program in cinema. And so after that summer, off I went to California, decided to get involved in the movies.
Well, obviously your film career took off from there, but did you completely shelve graphic design? Have you touched that since?
No, it stayed with me all along. Everywhere I went. First thing I found when I got to USC was an art department that had some silk screens. I was doing posters for it wasn't even much of a paying job. I think, I'd get like $30 or $50 to do the poster for the local film society's screening of a bunch of Buñuel films or things like that. I was still doing graphics and continued certainly in the work I did with John on his early films. Being a graphic designer came in handy every day. So
yeah,
it was more just a logical progression that I brought along with me. I use it all the time, even to this day. I put this book out recently. It's about Halloween 3, and there on the back you can see that H3 logo. That's one of my graphic design pieces. I stayed with it. Brand new book here, right there.
You just sold a copy.
You can take a picture of that, or you can I think you can get it on Amazon as well.
All right, I'll post it in the description of this.
Called Halloween 3, Where the Hell is Michael Myers? The title kind of says it all.
According to the almighty IMDb, you and John's first project together was Dark Star.
Well, it was John and Dan O'Bannon's project, and I came along. They were kind of 1 foot out the door of USC as I was 1 foot in the door. It was exciting to just help them finish they finished the student film for about 10 seconds. It was a student film. And then they immediately started expanding it into a feature. That was fun. It was still student filmmaking style and scotch tape and chewing gum and working out the trunk of your car on the weekend. But that was a thrilling experience. That was as good as film school in terms of learning how to do filmmaking.
In the trenches, essentially, yeah.
Absolutely. I was basically Dan's right-hand man, building sets, doing graphics, anything that helped the cause. I built the elevator shaft. I don't know if you know the movie, but just inventing things. There's this funky keyboard instrument with lots of bottles of water that one of the astronauts plays on as a diversion. I invented that thing. And, on a student film, you probably know this yourself, you got 3 or 4 people doing everything. Not a lot of big crew kind of work, but just 3 or 4 people doing everything. And Dark Star got put together more or less that way.
That led to a long time collaboration, obviously, between you and John. So when did you first hear about Halloween, and how did do you remember the project coming together?
Well, John called me at some point and said, looks like there's this movie. In between there, of course, after Dark Star, the first real feature with a real shooting schedule was Assault on Precinct 13. And on that film, John asked me to be the art director and do the sets for what was the movie was going to be mostly on a big master set. So he needed somebody to come up with that. That job fell to me. And then in post-production, being accustomed to following a movie all the way to the end, I went to see John in the cutting room. He was cutting his own footage, which is a challenge for a director. But low-budget movie can't afford an editor full-time, so he was doing it himself and looked kind of lonely in there. And I said, hey, give me a job. Let me help you finish this thing. And he said, well, can you cut sound effects? And this is, sure, why not? Well, let's make it up as you go along. So I learned a lot cutting sound effects, and John gave me the opportunity to cut the action sequences in that movie, which is a lot of shoot 'em up in a police station. And I think that gave him the confidence so that next time around he called me. Halloween was on. He asked me if I wanted to be the production designer and also would I edit the movie. John really liked working closely with colleagues and friends. Certainly everybody likes to work with familiar faces and people they can trust. So that's how that came about. I did that again for him on The Fog. Those two jobs are not especially compatible. Production designer, art director, plus film editor does not add up to much sleep, So after two of those, that was enough of that routine. But that was truly my extension of my film education, was those movies.
Pretty much become common knowledge to horror fans that you helped create the Myers mask, or at least, the look of it, how he ended up looking on screen. How did you decide on that?
Well, I didn't help create it. I did.
Right.
Right. I did completely adapt a Captain Kirk mask and turned it into what people call Michael Myers, but in fact, the script didn't call it that. It called him the Shape. Only referred to Michael Myers when the mask came off, and it was an actor doing the part for that one scene. Yeah, I invented the Shape mask. It's one of those circumstances where you're working with a shoestring budget. You just have almost no money to work with. So there was no question of doing what you would do if you had enough time and money, which is, okay, sculpt a face, sculpt a mask, do a mold, prototype, try it out, modify it, blah, blah, blah. No, I had to go shopping, find a likely blank face type mask, because that's what the script was asking for, and adapt it in some way. So that's what I did.
Obviously, Tommy, you don't have superpowers. You can't see into the future at this time, but now a mask that you created is pretty much the most popular mask in the world. It's on shelves. It's pretty much the face of Halloween. How does that feel for you? Just being a monster kid, and now you have the monster mask.
I like to say that the feelings are mixed. I'm delighted and proud of all of that. I'd be even happier if I was making a little money on the thing. I'd have a penny for every mask that was out there. I'd probably be able to send my grandchildren to college. But that's the way it goes.
Right.
I am proud of it and very pleased that we could never have dreamed of the phenomenon that Halloween created.
How long did it take you to realize personally just the cultural popularity of Halloween and sort of the zeitgeist?
It wasn't just a big smash hit right out of the box. Its release was modest, and some people didn't care for the movie very much, or they looked down on it. I think it was Roger Ebert who gave it a boost. He was impressed. He thought it was good. And it just gradually built a following. We knew it was a good movie. We knew it was a scary movie. We knew we'd put together something that was worthwhile for people who liked scary movies, who wanted to be entertained. But the fact that it just kept building and building and building and making more and more money as it went on, that was unexpected. And of course, what followed was also unexpected.
Oh, right. You just kind of mentioned The Fog. I wanted to ask you, what were some of the challenges you faced on The Fog as production designer?
Well, it's funny that you ask that, and it's a good question, because Halloween and The Fog consisted of virtually the identical crew from top to bottom, up and down the line. Almost every department was the same. So after such a success as Halloween, and although it was hard work, Halloween came together smoothly. It was really a dream situation. Although it did flay the skin off of everyone's back, because make a movie on $300,000, you're having to cut every corner and get lucky and work like a crazy person to bring it off. So you turn around and say, wait, we've got 3 times as much money, about $1 million, to go make The Fog. Ah, cool. This should be a dream, because 3 times as much money, same people, guaranteed success, right? No, wrong. That movie was so hard to bring off. It was so much more complicated than Halloween. And when we finally did, get the footage in the can, go into the cutting room, the first day I was in there cutting an ordinary scene from like a medium shot to a close-up, the cut bumped. It didn't quite work. And I couldn't understand why. I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. That cut should work. But it didn't want to. And the whole movie was a little bit like that. Things that you would think would just fall together like they had on Halloween, because it cut together like butter. On The Fog, everything was a struggle. And when we finally put it all together, John wrote a nice score for The Fog, and we screened it for ourselves and just a few trusted friends. Man, it just sat there. It wasn't bad, and I was sitting there trying to convince myself that it would be okay. But John, a brave soul and a kind of a visionary, he had the guts to stand up at the end and turn around and look at everybody and say, you know what? This thing doesn't work. We're going to have to do some more work. And so what followed was like a 3-week period of just blinding work. I still have the calendar, the editing room calendar page from that 3-week period that is it's just unbelievable what we did. We planned out a bunch of extra shooting sequences, rewriting, visuals, opticals, everything, crammed it into this tiny period. John even went and wrote a whole new score, and flurry of activity, cut it back together, exhausted all of us, sleepless. Then it worked. Then it was the movie that that you've seen. But it did not come easily. It was a major struggle.
In regards to that first cut that you guys watched, what were the issues in your opinion?
It just didn't quite have enough punch. One of the many things we did in the punching it up was anytime in the sequencing you see a single ghost kind of looming up through the fog like that, we shot that afterwards. That's me in a ghost suit, and that's John behind the camera. It was just like, it came down to that. Dean, in some of the reshooting, Dean lit the set late at night. He went home. Everybody else had left. And finally, it was just John and me. John on the camera and me in the ghost suit. Kind of, here's the fog machine. Okay, fog up. Ready, action. Okay, take that, develop it, bring it to the cutting room, cut it in. A lot of that kind of behavior that got us to the finish line. It's just one of those things about a movie needed more of a sense of expectation. All the sequencing at the beginning of these sort of poltergeist-like activities happening, things in a grocery store going kablooey, and all of that was added after the fact to set up what was coming. A lot of detail work of that nature that helped punch the whole thing up. The whole sequence with Adrienne on the roof of the lighthouse, that was added later, built a whole nother set for that. Stuff like that, all along the way. That was blinding hard work. It's a testimonial to how dedicated he has always been to getting things right.
I wanted to ask you, Tommy, was at the second Amityville 2, The Possession, was that your first time writing?
No, I'd written quite a bit by then, but let me see, maybe that was my first paying gig as a professional writer. I honestly can't remember what came first, but that was very early days for me as a writer. Actually, I think my first paying gig as a writer was called Far From Home. It's a movie that starred Drew Barrymore and Matt Frewer. Scary movie about a eerie trailer park out in the desert and a demented little kid who's killing people. But then came Amityville, and working for Dino was actually a great pleasure.
When you're writing, what's your process like? Are you one of those heavy outliners, or do you just like to go with the flow and fix it later?
John would be the one who just roars in and does it without an outline. I'm more inclined to try and sneak up on it, do at least a modicum of outline work and planning. But confronting the blank page and coming up with a full-blown screenplay that's 100 to 115 pages, any way you can get there is the final answer. Sometimes you just sit down and write. Sometimes you really work it out with somebody else, or you just have to make a leap of faith, because the most terrifying thing is to be sitting there and be stuck. If I've learned anything as a writer over time, it's to not edit yourself prematurely. If you have an editor sitting on your shoulder saying, "Oh, I don't think that's going to work," then you're dead. You have to just go ahead and stick it out there, whatever it is, how crappy it is, because what I've learned is that real writing is rewriting. The first draft doesn't matter as long as you got something on paper. Then it gets easier after that.
Bit of advice I like, I don't know who said it, was that you could always edit a bad page but not a blank page.
You're right. That's an excellent way to put it.
So I'll get a Chase with Pitchforks if I don't touch on Season of the Witch, Tommy. It's such a classic. And I've always wanted to ask about your choice to take that risk with the franchise and go the route that you did with the film, which I think paid off in time.
Well, you probably already know that I was briefly the director of Halloween 2. When Halloween 2 popped up, I was kind of the logical choice for directing because John was not interested in directing it at all. So it was probably going to come from within the family. That meant me or possibly Deborah Hill, producer, or maybe Dean Cundy, the director of photography. Anyway, I got the nod, and I was kind of getting lined up to what it was going to be. I was stumping for a 5 years later type sequel. I thought that would have rendered an effective story. And in fact, my ideas about that were realized later in H2O, that idea being, okay, this damaged person, Laurie Strode, finally 5 years later plucks up the courage to go off to college at a really protected institution, and it's maximum security, but that turns out not only to protect her, but to be a prison inside of which the shape, wreaks havoc. It was a good idea, and they used it well on H2O. Instead, John and Deborah decided to go with a 5 minutes later sequel, which in the intervening time between Halloween and Halloween 2, a lot of horror movies got made. It didn't happen right away. A year or two went by. And in that time, you had Friday the 13th and 100 others. And there was a kind of arms race of violence and gore that John was well aware of. So when he wrote Halloween 2, he threw all that in. And it was, to me, the antithesis of Halloween, which was virtually bloodless. It did all of its magic a different way, a more classic way, with suspense and expectation and manipulating the audience in various ways. And humor, too. Which
some would say the right way.
You said it. The Gore Fest was of no interest to me whatsoever. So when John turned in the script, I hated it. I just didn't like it at all and didn't see how I could bring anything to it. I could have done it, but I would have been kind of faking it, and that wouldn't have been fair to them. They needed a director who would be really super enthusiastic and do it well. So I said no, and didn't feel like the right way to start off my directing career. And I was very gratified when they returned to me and invited me to do Halloween 3. It being all new, all different, something experimental, I was delighted. I was delighted to be called back into the fold because those are friends after all. And I knew that, especially because Dean Cundy and that crew would be along, that it was likely to be successful, had a good shot at something really interesting. And to be sure, Nigel Neal turned in a really wonderful script. It needed a lot of work, which it turned out he was unwilling to do. So that John wound up rewriting Nigel, and then I wound up rewriting John. John never claimed credit for it, and Nigel took his name off of it. So I wound up with writing credit on basically a 3-writer script. But, it worked out. An awful lot of Nigel's ideas were intact. They survived. Just the general concept of a evil genius, toy maker type of guy who has these masks and he's planning a ritual sacrifice of the children. That was all straight from Nigel Neal. What we did was punched up. His script had a museum piece quality about it that felt a little bit stuck in 50s British television. And that was what we worked on, is kind of updating it. And I introduced the idea of these gray suit characters going around killing people, sort of corporate. I like the idea of the corporate looking suit guys being the villains, because an innate distrust of corporations in general and that whole world, as well as television, which I think is that is truly a two-sided coin. It can be a force for good, but boy, it can be a force for evil too.
Yeah, and you mentioned Roger Ebert giving you guys that boost on Halloween. What do you recall the general consensus being on part 3 when it was released? Well,
critically, it was mixed. A few people got it and said so, and I was gratified by that. But the fact of the matter is that the general reaction followed. If you can see the subtitle of the book, it says Halloween 3, Where the Hell is Michael Myers? That was the reaction of much of the viewing audience, because of all the things we got right, we got one thing really wrong, and that was the promotion of the movie, the advertising. It was a beautiful poster, and I don't know how many of those I've signed, put my autograph on. I love the poster, but it didn't tell us that it was going to be something different and something new, and we were trying a franchise here, And everybody bear with us because you're going to have a great ride. It's going to be fun and entertaining and interesting, but it's not Michael Myers. It's not Jamie Lee. We didn't do any of that. We didn't really set the table properly. And as a result, we paid the price. People sitting in the theater, a lot of them were expecting all of that, and it didn't deliver on those things at all. So it has taken many years for it to really be discovered in its own right as a legitimate entertainment, and something, in fact, that is a great deal more about Halloween, the season, and the rituals involved than the original Halloween ever was. The original Halloween was originally called The Babysitter Murders for the reason, obvious reason, that it was about babysitting, and the Halloween part was kind of tacked on. Right. And that was clever and that was good. But we really talked about Halloween. And I think that's one reason it's become so popular, is people love to show it part of their annual Halloween ritual.
There's always, there's the slasher aspect of, like you said, Friday the 13th and the subsequent Halloweens. But for me personally, what I've always loved about Halloween is the occult, ritualistic, witchcraft aspect. And that's why I loved Halloween 3. It was just so more my style of Halloween stuff.
Thank you. Deborah Hill, I think, had the original elevator pitch on Halloween 3. She and John had, after Halloween 1 and Halloween 2, they had had enough of the shape and the knife and Jamie Lee and babysitting and all that. So they were ready to try something new. And I believe she was the one with the brainchild of, the phrase was, witchcraft meets the computer age. It was just that simple. And that's what Nigel Neal took and ran with. I love it because it circles back on the origins of Halloween itself.
Right. Tommy, just another one of your projects, massive Fright Night and Fright Night 2 fan.
Heard a rumor that it's going to get a proper release at long last, along with Fright Night, as a boxed set next year in whatever the latest format is. It's beyond Blu-ray.
4K possibly.
Yeah, maybe it's 4K. That's a rumor coming out of England, I think. I'm not sure. It deserves a proper release because, like Halloween 3, thanks to Dean Cundy and Peter Jameson, a gorgeous movie, really pretty to look at. Fright Night Part 2 is also a beautiful movie, thanks to Mark Irwin and Dean Cheddar and others. Beautiful to look at, widescreen. So hopefully it'll get a proper release at last.
Was there any talk between you and Tom? I know he wasn't. Tom Holland, was he?
Holland?
Yeah. About carrying on the Dandridge angle with Regine, or was that the way you decided to carry forward?
Well, I co-wrote, I should say, a script that tried to just go on with something original. It's a little bit hard to retell something like that where the main character thinks he sees vampires, but he knows vampires aren't real, blah, 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 That's the hook of the whole thing. So we decided to do a sort of Fantastic Four version of people riding around in a limousine, glamorous vampiress, if you will, and freaky other characters in attendance, which I thought was super fun.
Yeah.
But shortly before we started shooting, I reached out to Tom, and we had lunch together. And I just wanted to touch base with him, you could say, in the way of passing a torch. It was, he didn't give me any great secrets about anything other than to say, what had been on his mind coming up with the original idea and what he thought was important about the whole thing. It was just a pleasant lunch, and he wasn't involved at all in the day-to-day or the writing of the script or any of that. Good guy. Enjoyed talking with him.
Tommy, you're also responsible for my personal favorite Stephen King adaptation. So just take us through landing the project, and how do you tiptoe between staying true to the source material while putting your own stamp on things?
Well, I'm sure you know that the novel It is more than 1,000 pages long, and the It miniseries, by the time it got to me, I think it had originally been planned as maybe a 3 or even 4 night miniseries with an appropriate sized budget. But along the way, I think different entities, producer here, writer over here, had nibbled away at some of that budget. So by the time it got to me, it was a 2 night miniseries. Well, 2 nights of a TV movie, TV movies 2 hours long, take away, let's see, 84, take away a substantial chunk of time for commercials. You've got a fairly small time frame in which to tell a 1,000-page novel. So right there,
Yeah.
your challenge is to hit the high points, try and capture the essence of the thing, but you are never, ever, ever going to get all the way down in the weeds with the original novel. So it had to be a kind of Reader's Digest condensed version of that. And a lot of credit for Night Number One, the structure of that, a lot of credit goes to Larry Cohen, the original writer of the teleplay, because the way television divides up its commercials, for no particular aesthetic reason, I'm sure for total money reasons, their movies, 2-hour time slot movies, are divided into 7 acts. Through a fabulous coincidence, there are 7 key characters in the original It. And so Larry was able to devote 1 act to each of the 7 characters. And I thought the structure was really brilliant, where we begin with present day, find them in their current situation, and they're getting the news that It has returned. And we keep going back in time to their childhoods and how it all unfolded. And then the drama arc of the first night is all about those children going down into the depths of hell, really, and dealing with It and doing combat literally with It. And then Night Number 2 is from the adult perspective, returning to the scene, to Derry, and grappling once again with the monster. And funnily enough, as good as the first night was, somehow or other, the second night script needed work, needed quite a bit of work. For me, the solution that was presented was to just drop virtually everything from the climax in the book and have this kind of TV movie solution that involved a dramatic leap from a second story of the library being impaled on a moose head or some. To me, it was just bullshit. I rewrote all that and tried to hew a little more faithfully to what the book was saying. I think it was okay. It wasn't as strong as Night Number One, but I think it was a legitimate ending to a movie. You can quibble with, well, gee, really, did all of that come to a spider? But that's what the book did, so what am I supposed to do? I tried to be faithful to that. But right. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I was very, very proud of it. It was a great shoot, fun shoot up in Vancouver, Canada. The adult actors and the children, I think our secret weapon was our casting. I believed that those children grew up to be those adults.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
We had a kind of a character camp where the adult actors and the children actors got together and worked out certain mannerisms. The most obvious being Bill Denbrough, Richard Thomas's character, and his child counterpart kind of had this thing. They kept grabbing their ear, something, little characteristic things like that
right.
would only be possible if the actors collaborated. So that was a real advantage, and I thought that was one of the great strengths of the story. A lot of people kind of forget that everybody calls Stephen King the master of horror and all it's about, scary this and scary that. But in truth, to me, the core of Stephen King's gift, and it is a gift, I think he's one of the great American novelists, the core of it is about rites of passage, especially rites of passage of children and the bonds you make when you're a kid. I think I succeeded in showcasing that. I think Rob Reiner did a great job showcasing that in Stand By Me.
Yeah, that's another great one.
And that's a Stephen King story. Yeah. I'm very proud of it. I have not seen the new one, I must say. I've got it here on a stack of DVDs, and I know I'll get around to watching it at some point. But I felt like there was a breach of logic. They've got this clown, their version of Pennywise is so sinister looking just on the surface, just taking a picture of the regular old clown. If you're a kid, would you walk up to that thing? I wouldn't.
Exactly.
A smart kid would stay as far away from that creature as possible, whereas Tim Curry's Pennywise was actually fun looking and kind of enticing to a little kid. Hi, Georgie.
Yeah.
You know, I thought they blew it right off the bat before I've even seen the movie because the guy looked so evil and scary.
My wife is also a massive It fan and Stephen King fan in general. She will not watch the new ones. We've seen them at theater. She won't watch them again. And I told her, I said, I'm talking to Tommy Lee Wallace tomorrow. He directed the It movie. She said, new or old? I said the old one, and she got excited.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Well, tell her thank you.
I will. I'm not going to keep you too much longer here, Tommy. But could you tell that Tim Curry was putting on a special performance at the time?
Oh, yes. He is a consummate professional. Bless his heart, he had a stroke, by the way. He still has bravely shown up at some of these cons to do autographs. And just the idea that he gets up and makes a showing is an act of great courage. He was endlessly inventive. He had actually the original Pennywise design I had done with the production designer. We had invented this big bulbous forehead, and we had a chin extension, and we had cheekbone extensions. And Tim didn't like that. He had been, I guess it was, I can't remember what the movie was before that he'd been covered so much in makeup, it might as well have been Joe Blow under there. He didn't want to wear all that stuff, but he was, he gamely agreed to put it on once, and we played with it. He looked really wild, but in the end, he was right. We removed the chin extension, we took away the cheekbones, we left the bulbous forehead, which I think was a good move. That was Tim under there. And he really just found the right notes to get right in between that lovable versus scary thing that he just played endlessly with that back and forth. It was fabulous. It was, yes, at the time, everyone was riveted by his performance right there on the set.
That's awesome. Well, this is just something I like to ask everyone to wrap up, Tommy, because you never know what they're going to say. Have you ever had an experience you would consider supernatural or paranormal?
I'm still looking. I'm still waiting, because I have been to some faraway places out in the plains of St. Augustine in New Mexico, a likely place for a UFO sighting if ever there was one. And I've been out there camping not too far from the Very Large Array, which are these big satellite dishes out in the middle of nowhere. You saw them in Contact, the Bob Zemeckis movie with Jodie Foster. I've been camping out there going, okay, guys, I'm ready. Come on, fly by, show me. And there's this eerie story about a creature called the Bell Witch.
Yeah, very familiar.
Being a Southerner, you may have heard that. In Tennessee, not too far away from Nashville, I wanted to look into that and see if there was a movie in it. And so I went to the Bell Witch cave. I took a friend with me. We went down in the cave. We saw all these photographs that the person who trying to turn this into a tourist attraction. They have snapshots of eerie lights and things, and paranormal kind of phenomena. So I think, okay, let's have it. Let's go down in the cave. Toured the cave, kind of kept wondering if anything might happen. And in fact, when we were done, nothing had happened. And I said to the person who was our guide, leave me down here for a little while, would you? If something is down here, I want to give it a chance to communicate. Okay? They did. My friend who was with me said, no, I'm not going to stick around for that. He left, and the person said, okay, here's the way out. When you're done, come on out through here. Thank you. And so I waited, and it was like, come ahead. I'm ready. I'm willing to believe. Do it. Nothing. 5 minutes, nothing. So, okay, see you. And I walked out. Well, so I've been ready and willing and able to bring, to experience such a thing. Hasn't happened to me, but you know what? My friend, a day later, called me up and he said, Tommy, I'm withdrawing from the project. I said, what? Why? What's up? He said, I can't tell you. I can't speak of it, but something happened when I got home, and that's all I'm going to say, and I got to drop out of the project. Just wanted to let you know. So there you go.
Well, there you go.
If there is a Bell Witch, the Bell Witch came to see him. And,
she got the wrong address.
Said, you better back off. Anyway, that's the best I can do in that category. I'd love to experience such things. I'm totally of the belief that supernatural things, spirit things are out there. I'm not cynical about that at all. Is there an afterlife? I think probably some, our atoms don't die when we die. Everything that makes up this body stays on. Is there a spirit that stays on? Don't know. I'm willing to believe it's true. Can that manifest as that crosses over that dimension? Do they feel like ghosts? Maybe. I don't know. But personally, haven't experienced it yet. I'm ready. I'm waiting.
One day we'll all find out, right?
I hope so. I don't know if there's any guarantee of that. I will add this one
Sure,
thing.
go ahead.
I often thought that it may be self-determining. In other words, if you believe that when you die, that's the end, you just lie there and it's over, then that may be what you get.
Right.
Whereas if you believe that, oh no, when I'm done with my body, my spirit can fly, that may be what you get. So I don't know how much your active belief system plays a part, but I'm ready to believe because, hey, I dream about flying all the time. I really look forward to the possibility that that's what you get to do when you die.
You and me both. Well, like I said, Tommy, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. Not going to keep you all evening. Thank you for giving me some of your time.
Justin, it's been a pleasure. Can you link Win? You've been in touch with Win.
Yeah.
If you can give Win that link, that would be great.
Absolutely, I will. No problem.
Okay.
You have a great rest of your day, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Tommy. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you back next time.
Monsters, madness, and magic.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts. Listen to podcasts.